All right, excellent. Welcome everybody. Delighted to see you all here today. Such a marvelous crowd. This is our first, as I said, this is our first Belfast Summer School lecture online of 2026. And I'm very excited today to introduce Mark Humphries. Mark is Professor of Ancient History at Swansea University in Wales. He's worked there since 2007. Crikey, that's nearly 20 years. Um,
Mm,
Mark, sorry. Mark gained his bachelor's and master's degrees in Dublin. When you listen to him talk, you'll notice a little bit of an Irish lilt. So he was in Dublin, and that you're born in Ireland, weren't you?
I was born in
You're
Belfast.
born in Belfast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, lived in Belfast until I was 11.
Okay, all right,
But the
yeah.
accent only comes out now and again, you know.
When you're talking to Irish people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Um, so he was at university in Dublin and then moved to St Andrews for his PhD in early Christianity. Mark specializes in late antiquity, and his research focuses on connections and interactions between the Mediterranean world of the Roman Empire and the neighboring regions of Eurasia and Africa. He is also editor of the Liverpool University Press series Translated Texts for Historians, and he is editor for Late Antiquity and Byzantium in the for the Encyclopedia of Ancient History. I hope I've got all that right. But today, Mark is going to talk to us about the Tyrant and the Ostrich's Head, emperors at the games in the early Roman Empire. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to just set off a timer so that I don't go on too long. Right now, just share my screen. Uh, Start that up. So hopefully, in a moment. Right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much, Helen, for inviting me and for that really kind introduction. As Helen says, I've been battling some infections, so this is my first public, well, almost my first public speaking engagement since I succumbed to that. I spoke at a conference in Maynooth uh, about a fortnight ago, and I felt dreadful then, so I'm fine now. I think we're fine-ish now. As Helen says, most of what I do is on late antiquity, so basically from the third century down to the rise of Islam, that kind of thing. But I'm not talking about that today because it's a bit of a niche interest. And I was trying to think of something that might have broad appeal. And thinking about the ancient world at the moment, there are two things that you think about. One is the Odyssey. You all think about the Odyssey very much at the moment. I've not seen it, so no spoilers, please. I don't know whether he gets home or not. We'll find out when I go to the cinema. But I suppose the other thing, if you're thinking about what I do, which is sort of mainly the Roman side of things, we think about, I suppose we think about sort of bread and circuses. So I thought I'd take that as my theme. And I hope that what I'll have to talk to you about this evening will be um, of broad interest. I'm not pretending that there's anything earth-shatteringly new in what I'm going to say, but I think it's quite interesting because it helps us to think of something that we associate with the popular image of the Roman world, but which I'm going to suggest actually has real relevance to the the Roman world and how the Romans thought about the Roman world. So that's my theme is looking at emperors at the games in the early Roman Empire. I've started, my title slide has as its backdrop this remarkable painting from 1872 by the French academic painter. This is what they're known as, Jean-Léon Gérôme. Um, Crept into the 20th century there, you can see. And this painting from 1872, Pollice Verso, is perhaps one of the best known modern depictions of the games in the Roman Empire. It's quite sensational. It sort of emphasizes the violence and bloodshed of gladiatorial combat in the Colosseum. You can see here there's some gladiators who have had a really bad day down here. This guy has another gladiator standing with his boot on his throat. He's appealing for mercy, and this gladiator here is waiting for instruction from the mob. And what you can see is there are lots of the mob putting their thumbs down. This is the sort of classic, or what people assumed in 1872 was the classic indication that they wanted somebody killed. And I think what is most sensational about this painting, among many sensational aspects, is that right at the forefront of the crowd, baying for the blood of the defeated gladiator, are the white robed sisterhood of the Vestal Virgins. So there's sort of, it reminds me a bit when I was growing up and we watched wrestling on the TV. There was always grannies at the front where, cheering on the wrestlers. This is the sort of ancient Roman equivalent. Now, I'm not really going to be talking about the Vestal Virgins. I'm more interested in this guy who's sort of sitting there looking a little bit sort of nonchalant and not totally engrossed, which is the figure of the emperor at the games. So that's what I'm going to be looking at, what role the emperor played in the games. And in many respects, this sort of connection between imperial power and the games is one that we're used to thinking of in various ways. And perhaps the best encapsulation of it is in Juvenal's 10th satire, when he talks about how essentially the Roman people have surrendered their political rights in favor of being fed and being entertained. So he writes in the satire, so this is the Loeb translation, the people that once used to bestow military commands, high office, legions, and everything, now limits itself. So the Roman people who used through the assemblies and elections bestow all these political offices have now surrendered it. Everything is within the gift of the emperor. And instead of this, the people has an obsessive desire for two things only: bread and circuses, panem et circenses. Now, the importance of bread and circuses in thinking about how Roman society works was quite nicely summed up by one of the most important books published on Roman social history in the second half of the 20th century, which is by the French historian Paul Venn, in his Le Pain et le Cercle, which was then first published in French in 1976, and an abbreviated English translation published in 1992 by Penguin. And in it, he sort of looked at the way in which bread and circuses are one of those things that you can think about as the sort of glue that holds Roman society together. And he foregrounds the circuses, the games, as one of these things that hold Roman society together. And it occurs to me that this is, something that, it looms large in the popular imagination, not least in the way that Rome is depicted in popular culture. And we've seen the 1872 painting by Jerome, which emphasizes the bloodshed and violence of the arena. And we also see it in other depictions. So, for example, Monica Chirino's book on big screen Rome takes its cover image from one of the classic depictions of the games in the ancient world as depicted on the big screen, which is, of course, Chuck Heston racing chariots in Ben-Hur against his opponent, who is Belfast-born Stephen Boyd. More of Stephen Boyd a little bit later on. So in terms of the way that people think about the ancient world, the sort of popular image of the Roman world, the games loom very large indeed, and both in scholarship and in the popular imagination. And it's this set of things that I want to explore today by looking at the question of the games and social order in the Roman Empire, and I want to approach the topic in the following way. So first of all, I want to look at the connection between spectacle and society, why it is that the games played such an important role that the Roman people, according to Juvenal, were content to abdicate their political role as long as they were fed, as long as they got games to watch. And we'll see that this is, in fact, something which is embedded in Roman society from a very early stage. And as soon as we can see Roman society in a fully developed form in the centuries of the late Republic, the role of spectacle in social and political life is well established. I then want to just review what sort of venues there were in the city of Rome for the games and for entertainments in the early empire, paying particular emphasis or paying particular attention to the circus and the arena for gladiatorial combat. I want to consider, though, that the main arena for gladiatorial combat, which is, of course, the Colosseum, is not just a venue for bloodshed and violence. It also plays an important role in sort of advertising the way in which the Roman social order was structured and the way in which the Roman order more broadly prevailed. So we'll see that the Colosseum is not just emblematic of bloodshed and violence, it's also there to present an image of Roman order under the emperors. Having done that, and the Colosseum is a building of the late first century, we'll then backtrack a bit to show that when the emperors built the Colosseum and built it to sort of epitomize Roman order, they were emulating the first emperor, the Emperor Augustus, who, in succession to the various politicians of the late Republic, had used public entertainment and games as a way of maintaining social order. So, in this first sort of 2/3 of the talk, we'll see how the games are not just there as sort of mindless entertainment; they are there to they're there to sort of demonstrate what the Roman order is, to provide an encapsulation of the Roman order. And one of the ways in which this operated was that the emperor was often present himself at the games, whether they were in the circus, whether they were in the Colosseum. So I want to finish by looking at the way that the ruler was looked at by the audience attending the games. And we'll look at an example of how this goes very badly wrong at the very end of the 2nd century CE, looking at one ruler in particular, and that is where both Stephen Boyd will come back in, local boy from Belfast, and it's where the ostrich's head will come in. So we'll be looking at the emperor and the gladiator at the very end. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's start with the context of spectacle and society. We would do if my let's try that. There we go. Okay, so in terms of the role of spectacle and games in impressing the Roman people, we've seen that Juvenal writes around the year 100 CE that the Roman people have effectively given up their political role as long as they are fed and for as long as they are entertained. This is often seen as sort of, summing up the sort of move from sort of like popular participation in politics to a more autocratic system under the emperors. But in fact, this role of spectacle had always been present in Roman political life. And a neat summing up of this can be found in this work. It's a pamphlet on how to run an election campaign. It's called the Commentariolum Petitionis. It survives in the manuscripts with the name of Quintus Cicero, who's the brother of the famous late Republican orator and politician Marcus Tullius Cicero, but there is actually no evidence apart from that to suggest that Quintus Cicero is in fact the author. Nevertheless, it's clearly a work of the mid-1st century BCE, and it gives various recommendations on how to get elected to political office at Rome. And one of the things that it says is one bit of advice that I've quoted here on the screen is that see that your whole campaign is full of pomp, that it is illustrious, that it is splendid, and that it is pleasing to the people. So one of the ways of winning over the Roman people in an election campaign was to be spectacular, to wow the people with displays and things like hosting games, hosting chariot races, that sort of thing. These all belong to the repertoire of ways in which Roman politicians sought to attract the votes of the Roman people. So even before the emperors come along, even long before Juvenal, the idea that games were central to Roman political life is well entrenched already by the 1st century BCE, when we can really see Roman society in detail for the first time. And this connection between spectacle and power was articulated in various ways, dealing with a society that lives outdoors for most of the or spends most of its time outdoors. They live in houses and apartment buildings, but an awful lot of public life is conducted out of doors. And one of the ways that you make an impression is by being spectacular. The games that are held in the circus or the amphitheater are just one point on a sort of scale, on a continuum of different forms of spectacle. And perhaps another famous form of spectacle that we associate with the Romans is the celebration of the triumph. That is, a victorious general is awarded the opportunity to parade through the city of Rome, accompanied by his troops and the spoils of the campaign that he has recently concluded. One of the best known of these is the sequence of 5 triumphs celebrated by Julius Caesar following his victory in the civil wars, and these are the 5 triumphs that he held in 46 BCE. There are a number of triumphs here. There's the triumph for Gaul, for the conquest of Gaul, then a triumph celebrating military victory at Alexandria, involving Cleopatra and stuff. Then the Pontic War, which is a war fought in Asia Minor. Then the African War, a series of conflicts in the Civil War fought in what is roughly now Tunisia and Algeria. And then the Spanish triumph, so wars fought in Spain. And what was really impressive about these, and this is why they are recorded, for example, here in Suetonius's biography of Julius Caesar, is that they were so spectacular. If the Commentarium Petitionis says, make yourself memorable by being spectacular, then Caesar really fulfilled that. So it says, these differed from each other in terms of the equipment and spoils displayed. And on the day of his Gallic triumph, he mounted the Capitol by torchlight with 40 elephants carrying lights to his left and right. And in his Pontic triumph, he displayed among the showpieces of the procession a famous inscription of 3 words, Veni, Vidi, Vici, usually translated as I came, I saw, I conquered. But I think you might actually think of it as translated as came, saw, conquered, because they indicate not just the events of the war, but the speed with which it was finished. So being spectacular, putting on a big show, is a really important part of Roman political life already in the last century of the Republic. And it's important not just to have this on the day, but also to remember it and to commemorate things. So one of the things that Roman politicians do is not just to show these celebrations when they happen, but also to sort of have nods to them in their, for example, their coinage, which would circulate quite widely. Now, this is a coin from Caesar a few years earlier, but it shows how on his coinage he emphasizes this connection between spectacle and power. There's a coin issued in 49 BCE. It celebrates, on the one hand, him holding religious office. So on one side, on the obverse, you've got various symbols there of him being one of the pontifices. But on the reverse, you've got an image which emphasizes sort of spectacle and power and Roman order. We have an elephant here trampling a draco, or a dragon, or a serpent. And this is closely associated with Caesar because you've got his name written underneath. So already then in the days of the Republic, we see that spectacle and power are deeply intertwined. And I want to turn to the days of the Empire, and just to begin with, to give you some orientation in terms of where you might find the venues for public entertainment. So I'm using here the famous model of Rome by the Italian architect Italo Gismondi, prepared in the early first half of the 20th century, which depicts Rome sometime around the year 300, early in the reign of the Emperor Constantine. Just to give you some orientation, we'll spot the Colosseum. This is the Roman Forum here. This is the Capitoline Hill with the Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus and so on. But one of the things that's noticeable from it is that there are many very large buildings, many of them built by imperial benefaction. This includes large bath buildings like this one here, the Baths of Trajan, or this one up here, the Baths of Diocletian. It has open spaces like the imperial forums here, just north of the Roman Forum, but also it includes buildings for public entertainment. And by the late Republic, these buildings are becoming more formalized, and we're getting the construction of these buildings in stone. So we have, for example, here the Circus Maximus, the main venue for chariot racing, which started out as a valley between two hills, the Palatine Hill here and the Aventine Hill here. There was a convenient valley there, nice bit of flat ground that can be used for chariot races. But by the time we reach the late Republic and early Empire, it's being sort of developed into a sort of massive stone building. It's also in the 1st century BCE that we get Rome's first proper stone theatre for dramatic performances and other performances as well. The Theatre of Pompey was built with the patronage of Caesar's great political adversary, Pompey the Great. So just as Caesar is having or hosting spectacles, so too is Pompey. Then when we move into the early centuries of the Republic, that landscape of venues for public entertainment gets much more emphatic. We have, under Augustus, for example, we have the theatre of Marcellus. We still have the Circus Maximus, but gradually over time, it comes to be dominated by the imperial residence on the Palatine Hill, which is connected with the circus by a number of corridors. So the circus becomes an important venue for the interaction between the emperor and his people. And the corridors connecting the imperial residences with the circus are really important for that. We then have things like more theatres built. So the theatre built by Augustus for his nephew and briefly designated successor Marcellus here in the Forum Boarium. We have the Colosseum, about which we'll see a lot more in a moment. And then we have in the Campus Martius, the Stadium of Domitian, built towards the end of the 1st century CE for Greek athletics. And if you've been to Rome and you've been to the Piazza Navona, you will know that the shape of the Stadium of Domitian is still visible in the streetscape of modern Rome. Now, these buildings for public entertainment, particularly the Circus Maximus and the Colosseum, are among the largest venues for the gathering of the populus Romanus, of the Roman people. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who are able to gather in these venues. So they're really important as places in which the Roman people can gather, and they're also really important as places where the Roman people and their ruler, the emperor, can interact. So I want to turn my attention now to looking at just one of them, looking at the Colosseum, and thinking of that as a place where emperor and people interact and where the Roman social order is on display. The Colosseum, as we know, is built in the reign of the Emperor Vespasian, who became emperor in 69 in the aftermath of the through the civil wars following the death of the Emperor Nero. And with Vespasian, we get the establishment of a new dynasty of rulers, the Flavian emperors. Vespasian, we can see illustrated in this coin, this gold coin of him. And he is described also in one of Suetonius's biographies. And in the life of Vespasian, Suetonius talks about the Colosseum and the construction of the Colosseum as one of a number of works that Vespasian undertook to embellish Rome now that he had established himself as emperor. So we're told that he also undertook new works. The Temple of Peace, hard by the Forum, and the temple to the deified Claudius on the Caelian Mount, which was begun by Agrippina, Claudius's empress, but almost utterly destroyed by Nero. Now, this emphasizes that what Vespasian is doing is not just building for the sake of it, but building with a political message. So by restoring the Temple of Claudius, he is effectively damning the memory of the Emperor Nero, who had essentially destroyed that temple. And then it goes on to say he also built an amphitheatre in the heart of the city, a plan which he learned that Augustus had cherished. And this is really important because he's not just building this for the sake of building it, but he's using it as an opportunity to show how much he resembles that paradigm for all early emperors, the first emperor Augustus. So under Vespasian, then, the Colosseum is built, and I want to look at various ways now in which it is a sort of reflection of Roman order, not just a venue for violent games. Now, one way in which the building represents Roman order can be seen if we look at the dedicatory inscription. Now, the dedicatory inscription of the Colosseum is rather sadly damaged, not least by the fact that the stone on which it was carved was reused in the middle of the 5th century when the Colosseum was restored by the emperor, in the name of the emperors Theodosius II and Valentinian III, by a senator called Rufius Caecina Felix Lampadius, who was prefect of the city of Rome in 443 to 444. And what you have here is the stone which includes the names of these late individuals. Now, it was noticed by a German scholar working on this that actually, well, Hungarian German scholar working on this, that this stone is not only shows this 5th century inscription, but also it is pockmarked with various holes. And those holes were to take the bronze dowels which were attached to letters from the original inscription. And because inscriptions are quite formulaic, and because we can work out from where these holes are, what letters were attached here, we can work out what the original inscription was. So originally there was this stone with the letters carved into it, and then those letters were inserted in bronze, and the bronze was held in place by dowels. Later on, that bronze was removed, the stone was cut back, and then this later inscription was put on top. But looking at the original inscription and reconstructing the original inscription on the basis of these dowel holes actually tells us quite a lot about how important the Colosseum was when it was first dedicated in the 1st century CE, so 400 years before this set of renovations. So this is the reconstruction. You can see here the blocks of stone that I showed you in the previous slide, and then the letters of the original inscription that have been reconstructed by Geza Alfoldi from these dowel holes on the piece of stone, or the various pieces of stone. And there are a number of things which are quite interesting about it. The first thing to note is that the original inscription read, "The Emperor Caesar Vespasian Augustus ordered the new amphitheatre to be built from the profits of war." And I'll come back to the profits of war a little bit later. But one thing to note is that actually the inscription has been revised at a very early stage, in that in between imp for imperator and Kais for Caesar, the letter T was inserted. And this is because the dedication of the Colosseum, it had been begun by Vespasian, but was completed by his son Titus. So the T seems to be inserted there. It doesn't fit the spacing of the inscription very well. You can see that the letters are a bit more crowded here if you compare them with, for example, the gap between Vespasianus and Aug, meaning Augustus. So the inscription has been revised to insert the T to indicate that it is Vespasian's son Titus who has overseen the dedication of the Colosseum. So begun by his father Vespasian, completed by the son Titus. And we can see that Titus made quite a big deal of the dedication of the Colosseum, for example, by minting coins that showed the dedication of the Colosseum. And you can see in this coin here, for example, the Colosseum with the audience inside watching some form of spectacle. So the Colosseum is important then for the emperors, in that, first of all, Vespasian wants to set up a big inscription in bronze letters celebrating his dedication of the building. That inscription is then taken over by his son following Vespasian's death to emphasize Titus's role in the dedication of the Colosseum. The other way in which it reflects Roman order is that it is built, so we can work out from the dowel holes, ex manubiis, that is, from the profits of war. So the Colosseum, whatever else we might think of it, is a big victory monument. It is a monument to celebrate the victories won by Vespasian and by his son Titus. And that almost certainly means that the Colosseum, which is a huge building, must have cost an enormous amount of money to construct, was almost certainly built with the proceeds of the signal military victory of Vespasian and his son Titus. That is also commemorated in a monument erected to Titus, not far from the Colosseum. I'll show you a slide in a moment where you'll see how all these monuments are connected or related in the topography of Rome. And that is the Arch of Titus on the Via Sacra. So as you go from the Colosseum towards the Forum, you go along the Via Sacra and you go through this triumphal arch erected to celebrate the victories of the Emperor Titus. And those victories are illustrated in reliefs on the central passageway of the arch, and they're justly famous because what they show is the victory spoils being paraded through the city of Rome. You can see the procession here. It's going through a gateway into Rome, and you have placards that would include details of what victory had been won. Those don't, painted decoration of those is long lost, but it's very clear what victory we're dealing with here, because here we have the seven branched candelabrum, the menorah, the Jewish menorah. What this commemorates is the triumph celebrated at Rome by Titus following the destruction of Jerusalem and the capture of the temple treasures by Titus and his father Vespasian. Vespasian had come to power near Jerusalem because he'd been proclaimed emperor there. He then left the siege of Jerusalem in the hands of his son Titus, while Vespasian, the father, went to claim the imperial throne. And then we have this arch which commemorates this victory and shows the spoils, the spectacle of spoils that was put on display for the Roman people. So these are the spoils of war, almost certainly, that are mentioned in the Colosseum inscription. So we have then this, it just gives you an idea of the location of things. So we have the Colosseum here, then we have the Forum over here, we have the Via Sacra, the sacred way that connects them, and at this important point on the brow of the hill, as you go up from the Colosseum and then begin to descend into the Forum, is the Arch of Titus, celebrating that victory at Jerusalem in 70 AD or 70 CE, and the Colosseum similarly celebrating that victory in 70 CE. But also relevant to this use of buildings for public entertainment being used to sort of celebrate Roman victory is the Circus Maximus, because in addition to the Arch of Titus between the Colosseum and the Forum, we know that there was another Arch of Titus, this time located in the Circus Maximus. Now that arch, remains of it were excavated in 2015 in this particular part of the circus, so an opportunity to investigate the archaeological remnants of that arch. But actually, we knew about that arch for a long time because the inscription from the arch was still visible in the Middle Ages and was copied down in a medieval manuscript. So we have the text of the inscription long before we found the actual remains of the arch. And the arch says, "The Senate and people of Rome, to their princeps, to their prince, Imperator Titus Caesar Vespasianus Augustus, son of the divine Vespasian," all the various titles, and then claims why this arch is being erected. "He did subjugate the Jewish people and lay waste to the city of Jerusalem, which all leaders, kings, and nations before him had either failed to do or had left untried." So this victory in the war against the Jews and the capture of Jerusalem and the conquest of Jerusalem was a big deal for Vespasian and for his son Titus, just at the point when they were establishing themselves as emperors in Rome. And what we have essentially are three buildings in the center of Rome which celebrate this. We have this arch in the Circus Maximus. We have the arch with the display of the temple treasures being paraded through Rome on the Via Sacra. And the Colosseum itself is also a victory monument celebrating that victory. It is built with the spoils from this extraordinary campaign. So to sum up what Vespasian and Titus were doing in the years between 69 and 81 CE, they're building the Colosseum not just as an outlet for the passions of the Roman people, but with the proceeds of a Roman victory, the capture of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The celebration of this victory at Jerusalem was also displayed not just at the Colosseum, but also at the Circus Maximus. So we've got two venues for public entertainments associated with the celebration of this victory at Jerusalem. Together, the monuments celebrate the establishment. They celebrate both the victory at Jerusalem, but also the establishment of a new imperial dynasty. Vespasian had come to power following a period of civil war after the death of Nero. So these buildings and their grandeur and their emphasis on Roman victory emphasize how Vespasian and then subsequently his son Titus had brought order following the chaos of a period of civil war. They also emphasized how Vespasian and then subsequently his son Titus were negating the sort of capricious activities of the last member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the Emperor Nero, because the Colosseum was built on the site of private pleasure gardens, which had been established by Nero. Those were now closed. A lake, in fact, was drained where the Colosseum was subsequently built. And now what had once been the private property of a tyrannical emperor, Nero, was now given by Vespasian to the people of Rome. So everything about the Colosseum is really political. And last but not least, as we saw in Suetonius, the Colosseum evoked memories of Augustus, because apparently this was a project that the first emperor, that paradigm of imperial rulership, had wanted to achieve but had never gotten around to. So by building the Colosseum, Vespasian is able to emphasize how much he is like his predecessor, Augustus. And this prompts me now to look back to Augustus and think about how Augustus also used spectacle and games as a way of maintaining order. So we start with the famous statue of Augustus from Prima Porta in his guise as a victorious general, the breastplate showing him receiving Roman standards back from the Parthians. So a victorious emperor is, this is an important part of Augustus's personality, just as it would be a century later for Vespasian and his son Titus. One of the things worth remarking about Augustus is that he also saw the political utility of spectacles, games, and public shows. So Suetonius says in his biography of Augustus that Augustus surpassed all his predecessors in the frequency, variety, and magnificence of his public shows. So with the emperor, we now get more spectacular games than you get at an earlier stage. He then goes on to say that Augustus himself says that he gave games 4 times in his own name and 23 times for other magistrates who were either away from Rome or lacked means. So an emphasis here on Augustus, not just as a patron of the games, but the patron of the games on behalf of others. And what we can see here is how Augustus is this important bridge between the sort of use of games and spectacle, which we saw as so important in the late Republic, and the use of games and spectacle as important under the emperors. So Augustus provides the sort of pattern for it. Suetonius says that Augustus tells us himself about this. And what Suetonius presumably has in mind are the documents left by Augustus, of which we have a copy in the Res Gestae Divi Augusti, this sort of record of his achievements that Augustus put together towards the end of his reign in 14 CE, which was originally set up in bronze on bronze inscriptions outside Augustus's mausoleum in Rome. Unfortunately, those bronze inscriptions haven't survived because bronze tends to be melted down. But we have a copy of it, various copies of it, particularly from Asia Minor and particularly from the modern Turkish capital Ankara, where there is a temple with a copy of the Res Gestae, both in Latin and in Greek translation. And from that, we can reconstruct the text with a certain amount of accuracy. And one of the things that he emphasizes is that he was a patron of the games. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this, but notice that one of the things that he emphasizes is that the frequency with which he gives the games and just how spectacular these games were. So the beginning of chapter 22 here of his account of his achievements, he says, I gave 3 gladiatorial games in my own name and 5 in that of my sons and grandsons. And at these games, some 10,000 men took part in combat. So we're talking about 10,000 gladiators. Now, the number presumably just shouldn't be taken literally. It just means lots. He then talks about how he was a patron for displays of athletes summoned from all parts of the Roman world. So emphasizing that there are these athletic games which emphasize Roman power, the fact that the Romans are able to import athletes from all around the Mediterranean world. Then this is the bit that Suetonius is building on. I produce shows in my own name 4 times, and in place of other magistrates 23 times. I produced the secular games. I was the first to produce the games of Mars, and that these then happened on a regular basis. I gave beast hunts of African beasts on 26 occasions, and and across these 26 occasions, some 3,500 beasts were destroyed. So here we have, there are many things to dislike Augustus about. Here we have another. It's Augustus's eco-terrorist. And then in the next section of the Res Gestae, he talks about how he produced a naval battle as a show at a specially constructed arena in what is now Trastevere in Rome. And he talks about the dimensions of the site: 1,800 feet long, 1,200 feet broad. And he talks again about the quantities of spectacles on display. 30 beaked triremes or biremes and still more smaller vessels took place in these mock naval battles. And in addition to those rowing these boats, there were about 3,000 men fighting in these mock naval battles. So this image that we get in Suetonius of Augustus, giving games and offering spectacles on a scale that exceeded, anyone up to that point, even Julius Caesar with his amazing, spectacular triumphs, is borne out by what Augustus himself tells us. And notice that one of the things that Augustus is really keen to emphasize is not just that he gave these things, but how frequently he gave them, how many individuals participated in them, how many animals were involved in them, how many ships were involved in the mock sea battles, how big everything was. So a real emphasis on the emperor as a patron of games on a lavish spectacle. Now, this emphasizes that Augustus has effectively aggregated all political power to himself, and his dominant place in Roman politics and society is neatly encapsulated by the way in which he is this extraordinary patron of the games. But the games are important to Augustus in terms of the social order in other ways too, in that he wasn't just interested in the games as a way of showing off, as using the games as a massive ego trip to demonstrate his power. He also saw the potential of the games, and particularly the participation of the Roman people in the games, as a way of sort of emphasizing his devotion to the social order. So here again in Suetonius's Life of Augustus, he talks about how he introduced regulations about where you could sit in the seating area, and that rather than being you going in and choosing your seat from whatever was free, it was actually determined where you would sit according to your status. And we're told that he was encouraged to do this by an episode in Puteoli near Naples, where a senator, on entering a theatre, wasn't able to find a seat, and Augustus thought this was outrageous. So he introduced legislation which regulated where people sat. So the front rows of seats in any venue for public entertainment would be reserved for senators. We're also told that he wouldn't admit the ambassadors of foreign powers into posh seats at the front of theatres when he learned that some of them were not of aristocratic status, that they were mere freed slaves. He also introduced rules for the seating which separated soldiers from civilians, special seats to married members of the plebs, special seats for boys who were not yet come of age with their tutors sitting nearby, and he banned the wearing of dark cloaks except in the back rows. In other words, what you have in the seating of these venues for public entertainment is sort of the Roman society and the structure of Roman society on display. And this is marked out by where people sit. So senators and other important individuals right at the front, different sections of Roman society allocated different parts of the seating in which to sit. And also it's marked out by colour. So the senators resplendent in their white togas at the front, and only at the in the rear seats could you wear dark clothing. So in various ways then, if we look at what Augustus has done and think also about what Vespasian has done, we've seen that the games are really important for maintaining imperial order and advertising the benefits of the imperial order, at least as the emperors saw it. So emperors invested significant sums in the construction and renovation and restoration of venues for the games. And we can see this very clearly in the dedication inscription for the Colosseum. The games were also a place where the emperor could broadcast messages that he wanted to, sort of emphasize the benefits of, as he saw it, imperial rule. So about imperial victories in the case of the Colosseum, and also about the structure of Roman society. If you went in to sit in the circus or the theatre or the Colosseum, you could look around and you could see the social order of Roman society on display. So there are two spectacles going on in these places. There are the games or the theatrical presentations which are going out and are going on in the arena or on the stage, but there's also the spectacle of how people are arranged in the seating area. And of course, the emperor himself was often on display at these games because of the size of these venues. This is one of the easiest ways for the Roman people to see who their emperor was. They could go along, they could attend the games, they could look across to the imperial box and see the emperor himself. So these were very important venues for the interaction between emperors and their subjects. But on occasion, this could go wrong. And this is where, at last, I'm going to tell you about ostriches and heads and stuff like that. So what I want to do to finish off is by looking at the, if you like, the truth behind the image that we get of emperors and the games. For example, in Ridley Scott's Gladiator from 2000. There is a sequel, which I'm afraid I haven't seen because everyone said it was dreadful. But it culminates, as you know, with Joaquin Phoenix as the Emperor Commodus fighting against the Roman general Maximus, played by Russell Crowe in the Colosseum. Now, like many things in Gladiator, and like in many things by Ridley Scott, none of this was original. This story, or something like it, had been already depicted in a much earlier film from 1964, the Fall of the Roman Empire, which culminates with a gladiatorial combat between Commodus, this time played by Christopher Plummer. He's about as far removed from the Sound of Music here as you can imagine, and fighting against a Roman general who is called Livius and is played by Belfast native Stephen Boyd in this. Stephen Boyd playing Livius in this. He'd also played Messala in Ben-Hur. Now, this depiction of Commodus as somebody who engaged in gladiatorial combat is in fact something that's rooted in the sources for Commodus's reign, even if either as Christopher Plummer or as Joaquin Phoenix, the physical resemblance between these actors and the historical Commodus is, as I think you can see, slight. Okay. And what we have is an eyewitness account of Commodus fighting as a gladiator by a writer in Greek called Cassius Dio. He was a member of the Senate. He came from the province of Bithynia in Asia Minor, and he wrote a Roman history. And he wrote this Roman history in many, many books. Not all of it survives, but luckily some of the bits that do survive, more or less intact, are his accounts of what Commodus got up to in the arena. And he provides a really good example of how the emperor in the arena could, instead of being exemplifying the Roman order, could emphasize chaos. So he talks about how on numerous occasions Commodus fought in the arena as a gladiator. But one of the things that's interesting about his account is that he emphasizes that Commodus is a little bit unimpressive. He's a bit of a coward. He's not really brave like the gladiators. He is an eco-terrorist, though, as we will see. He's killing lots of animals. So we're told that on the first day, he killed 100 bears all by himself. But we're told he shot down at them from the railing of the gallery. So he wasn't in the arena with the bears. He was on an elevated platform. Then we're told on another day, he descended to the arena from this place above and cut down all the animals that were led to him. But these are domestic animals. These are farm animals. And they were also led up to him in nets. Okay, so again, he's not really very brave. We're also told he killed a tiger, a hippopotamus, and an elephant. And having performed these exploits, he would retire, but later, after lunch, he would fight as a gladiator. Dio goes on to say, that spectacle of the general character that I've described lasted 14 days. When the emperor was fighting, we senators together with the equestrians always attended. And only one individual, this guy called Claudius Pompeianus, never appeared because he was appalled at the idea that the emperor, the son of the much admired emperor, Marcus Aurelius, was conducting himself in this appalling fashion. And Cassius Dio says that people were frightened not to attend. They showed up because they felt that the emperor was taking note of who was there and who wasn't. But like many serious events, like a giggle at a funeral, I'm afraid, this is one of these things where the urge to laugh can sometimes take over. And this is where the ostrich comes in. So Dio, again, writing as an eyewitness, tells about this episode. He says, here is another thing that he did to us senators that gave us every reason to contemplate our deaths. Having killed an ostrich and cut off its head, he came up to where we were sitting, and it would be quite obvious where they were sitting. They were all there in their togas, sitting right at the front in the Colosseum. And he held up its head in his left hand, and with his right hand, he waved his bloody sword. And although he did not speak, he wagged his head with a grin, indicating that he would treat us in the same way. So he's saying to these senators, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to treat you like I treated this ostrich. And of course, in response to this, the senators want to laugh, but they realize that if they do that, that's probably the last thing they're ever going to do. Because he goes on to say, many of us would have perished by the sword on the spot for laughing at him, because it was laughter that overcame us, not indignation. But, Dio says, I chewed some leaves that I took from my garland and persuaded the others sitting near to me to do likewise, so that in the steady movement of our jaws, we might conceal the fact that we were laughing. So clearly, Commodus's behavior as a gladiator has gone wrong. But why is Dio reporting this? Why does Dio feel it necessary to talk about this disgraceful conduct by the Emperor Commodus? Well, he reflects upon it. He realizes that by mentioning this is that he's mentioning something disgraceful. So he explains why he brings it into the story, apart from the fact that he was there and he witnessed it. He says, let no one feel that I am sullying the dignity of history by recording such occurrences. On most accounts, to be sure, I should not have mentioned this exhibition. But since it was given by the emperor himself, and since I was present myself and took part in everything seen, heard, and spoken, I've thought proper to suppress none of the details, but to hand them down, trivial as they are, just like any events of the greatest weight and importance. So he thinks that these are important events that need to be done. And in fact, what Dio is doing here by emphasizing the depravity of Commodus as a gladiator is he's using this as an opportunity to sum up something about the nature of Roman history at this time. As we saw earlier, one senator, Claudius Pompeianus, refused to attend because he had fond memories of Commodus's father, Marcus Aurelius, and felt that he did not want to sully Marcus Aurelius's memory by seeing Marcus's son Commodus behaving in this way. And if we go back to the bit where Cassius Dio in his Roman history talks about the transition from Marcus Aurelius to Commodus, he emphasizes that this marks a decline in Roman history, and that Commodus is very much responsible for that decline. He talks here at the end of Marcus Aurelius's reign. He says that Marcus did not meet with the good fortune that he deserved. He was not physically strong and was involved in a multitude of troubles, mainly wars throughout his reign. But for my part, Dio says, I admire him all the more for this very reason, that amid unusual and extraordinary difficulties, he both survived himself and preserved the empire. But just one thing prevented him from being completely happy, namely that after rearing and educating his son in the best possible way, he was vastly disappointed in him. This matter must be our next topic, for our history now descends from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust, as affairs did for the Romans of that day. So the conduct of Commodus as a gladiator epitomizes this transition in Roman history from Marcus Aurelius to Commodus, from an age of gold to an age of iron and rust. So that the business of describing Commodus is not just flippant, it's not frivolous, it makes a very serious point about the empire. So the story of Commodus as gladiator emphasizes the dramatic transition in the state of the empire between his father, Marcus Aurelius, and his own reign. And it's interesting to contrast what Commodus did in the games with what we're told his father, Marcus Aurelius, did. We hear from a later source written in the 4th century called the Historia Augusta that Marcus, when he attended the games, far from fighting in the games himself or participating in the games himself, instead, during his attendance at the games, was actually engaged in the business of government. We hear that he read, listened to, and signed documents at the circus games, and we're told that actually, that didn't earn him much affection from the people, who were rather annoyed at the emperor's distraction with the business of government, rather than focusing on the games. So to sum up, what we see is that the early empire saw the emperors investing significant capital in the developing of venues for the games. And these games were political, and they were linked to the Roman favor for all sorts of political spectacle. Good emperors, so-called good emperors, used the games to reinforce Roman political order. So, for example, Augustus using the games to emphasize his elevated position in Roman society, but also to emphasize by the seating of the audience the structure of Roman society. And then, as we saw, Vespasian and Titus using the games and using the construction of venues for the games to emphasize their restoration of order after a period of chaos. But bad emperors could be associated with unbecoming conduct in the arena. And we've seen how Commodus is described by Cassius Dio as behaving in a way which somehow exemplifies the decline of Roman history from Marcus Aurelius's time to the time of Commodus. And that's all I've got to say. So thank you very much for listening. Okay, just some links there if you want. I've also got further reading which I can send on to Helen if she would like to distribute it. Okay. Well, I stop sharing, Helen.
Perfect. Thank you.